When it comes to braising, the best cuts of meat to use are generally the most flavorful, and they come from the harder worked muscle groups, the leg, the shoulder, the neck areas of the animal. Butcher Pat Lafreda is here to share his knowledge of the best slow-cooked cuts. So Pat, I'm so happy that you're here with some very delicious looking cuts of meat. Can we just go through them one by one and understand why these are so good for braising?
Sure. One of my favorite pieces of meat to braise is brisket. And in my family history, I mean, this
so that's pot roast, right? Sort of?
It's sort of like pot roast,
Yeah.
yes, but there are two muscles in the brisket that a lot of people don't realize. Most people go for the first cut, which is the bottom, more uniform rectangular shape. The second cut, otherwise known as the decal, which is here, has so much more marbling.
Is that this part up here?
Right, that's this part. So what I do and what my family's always done was taken that part off, the less desirable, less expensive part, and we braise that. So we rub it with some ground clove, braise it, and then serve it with a reduced honey and brown sugar.
Oh, yum.
Oh, it's delicious.
I'm going to try that. And then what is this beautiful piece?
This is a chuck pot roast. So where the ribeye ended, the spinalis muscle and the longissimus muscle continue into the shoulder, and that's the first cut out of the chuck.
Now, those look like short ribs.
Yes, those are plate short ribs and of the tastiest cuts of all. So those three bones from the plate short rib yield the most amount of meat, and that's how you have them so thick. So cut flanken style like that's the perfect way to ask your butcher to cut that.
Now, one of my favorite meats on this whole table is this.
Yes,
which,
I think
which a lot of people don't ever eat, but it is so delicious.
And no matter what animal it's on, it's the tail, but most commonly referred to as the oxtail.
Right.
And you could see how much connective tissue that there is around it, and that's where all that flavor comes from. So braising this on the bone, you get the flavors from the bone, you get the flavors from the connective tissue.
And it's one of the easiest things to braise, I find. I mean, just brown it, add a little bit of water, salt, pepper.
And pull it.
And that's it. Yeah, it's so delicious. Now, these are amazing veal shanks, right?
Yes.
For ossobuco?
So these are center cut veal shanks, and when you order these from your butcher, you should ask for the hind shank because it's most uniform and you get a great amount of marrow from the center of that bone.
Yep, and the marrow is what really makes it such a luxurious dish.
It does.
And get out your marrow spoons.
Yes, I love restaurants that serve the ossobuco with a little marrow spoon so you could get in there and get that marrow out.
Now, are these shanks?
Yes, lamb shanks, and these are the foreshanks, so they come from the front shoulder. And when you're making a lamb shoulder roast, it's best to remove the shanks and to cook these separately. So although they look large, it's the perfect portion for one person, so you'll get about 10 to 12 ounces of finished meat from it.
Now, this is lamb.
That's the lamb neck. So when we want to talk about flavor, the connective tissue of everything that holds up the head, it's just a cut that's packed with collagen. And when we're talking about slow cooking and braising, all that collagen is going to really cook down and become gelatinous and delicious.
And then chicken legs and thighs.
Yes, there's been so much talk lately about chicken dark meat. And I think for many, many years, we've all been trained to eat the white meat and the breast meat, but the chicken thighs and the dark meat is where all the flavor is. So with breast meat, unless you're gonna grill it, you usually have to bring fat to it, like a breaded chicken cutlet or something like that. Whereas dark meat, you just have to grill it or braise it. You don't have to add any fat or fry it.
Yeah. Well, this is quite a good primer on cuts of meat that are perfect for braising. And Pat, thank you very much for dropping by. Thanks for bringing us examples of all these wonderful cuts. And I'm sure everybody has learned a lot, as I have.
Well, thank you for having me.
When I was growing up on Elm Place in New Jersey, in Nutley, New Jersey, every single home had its version of pot roast. At our house, the pot roast was born out of frugality. It was a dish made with inexpensive cuts of meat and basic root vegetables cooked together in the same pot. And that meal stretched to make meals for days to come, even in a family like ours of 6 kids and 2 adults. And today, well, the pot roast is still a favorite money-saving dish. This is one of my favorite things to do, braise a nice chunk of meat like this chuck eye roast. First step is to brown the meat. Very essential. You want a good looking piece of brown meat when you're finished. And you can't brown meat in liquid. It just won't brown. Even in the oven, it just won't brown if there's any moisture whatsoever. So we're going to brown the meat first in a little bit of olive oil right in the pot in which we're going to make the pot roast. Before you brown it, put some salt and pepper all over it. A generous amount, rub it into the meat. Pre-seasoning is a really important part of the process. It's good to keep a piece of paper, parchment paper, under the meat. That way you really keep your counter clean. And when working with raw meat, remember to wash your hands after, and remember your pepper should be freshly ground, your salt a good quality. Okay, ready to start browning. Quite hot in the bottom of this pan. You're going to hear a lot of sizzling there. And don't try to turn the meat until it easily releases. It'll tell you when it's ready to turn. Smells good already. Now, most pot roasts, most braises start with a mirepoix, which is a combination of aromatic vegetables, generally an onion, a carrot, and a stalk of celery. And we're just going to cut the onion into thin slices like this. Coarsely chop the celery and carrots, which have been peeled. The same combination of vegetables is called a sofrito in Italian. So they're ready to go. I think we can try to turn the meat. Lifting easily. This is a very wonderful piece of meat, browning perfectly. Look at that fabulous color that it's getting. That's what you want on your finished pot roast. You'd want a nice dark exterior and a well-cooked, silky result. The meat has been tied. That holds the shape. The browning of the meat takes about 8 to 10 minutes. Have patience. It's worth it. Now remove the meat to a baking sheet. There. Oh, great looking. So delicious. And now to the pot. Just add your lovely onions, your thyme, bay leaf, peppercorns, carrots, and celery. And you don't really want to brown the onion as much as make it translucent in the olive oil. For most braising, you would have this kind of a base of vegetables in the bottom of the pan. This takes 2 or 3 minutes. And if they start to cook too much, you can add just a little bit of water to stir up the brown bits. And I'm going to do that right now, just a little bit. Well, the onion has softened, the celery too. Carrots take a little bit longer because they're harder, but it's ready and time to add the flour. Just 1 tablespoon of flour will do, and cook that well done. You don't want to have a floury taste. And the flour allows the liquid to be absorbed and sauce to thicken. If the flour is well done, add the rest of your water. And so altogether, we've added about 1 1/4 cups of water. Now, some people might want to add a little bit of red wine, beef stock, veal stock, vegetable stock. It really doesn't matter, but I think water just works very well, and about 2 tablespoons of red wine vinegar for a little bit of acidity. So can you see how it's thickening? So now, just lower the heat so it's simmering but not boiling, and the liquid should come up only about 1 inch on the sides of the meat. And here goes our meat. Cover it tightly, and with less liquid in the pot, you'll need to watch it more carefully and turn the roast more frequently. Just cook, turning every 30 minutes until tender, 2.5 to 3 hours. So now the meat is quite beautiful. Remove it carefully to a baking sheet like this. You're going to put the meat back in, but we want to cook the rest of the vegetables. And we want to strain this gravy. So into a bowl, just strain, and we'll also take out a little bit of the fat. So all the aromatics have really cook down. Press them through the sieve as much as you can. So this is basically the gravy and the sauce. Put this back into the pot. But you see you have a pretty nice brown gravy. It's very, very tasty. And the vegetables, about 3/4 pound of carrots, of turnips, and of tiny baby potatoes. You can use quarters or sliced potatoes, thickly sliced potatoes too. This is the nice turnip. And peel the turnip, and I'm cutting it into wedges, sort of like apples for an apple pie. And now turn the heat back on. Once this comes back to a simmer, put the meat back on top, cover, and cook for another 15 to 20 minutes or until the vegetables are tender to the point of a knife. So the meat is out of the gravy. It looks really tender and so delicious. Now remove carefully the trussing strings. Now, it's important to let the meat rest for about 10 or 15 minutes because if you try to slice it when it's really, really hot, it may just completely fall apart. This is a very tender cut of meat. Now, that looks like pot roast. Grandma Gilbert's, Grandma Roskovsky's, Grandma Kostira's, my mother's, mine, and now yours. The meat has reached the right consistency. When it is silky, can be shredded easily, and the meat should be very, very tender, but firm enough just to slice so it looks like that. Now that looks really good, braised pot roast.
Cooking at home